South Korea is having a hard time with its fertility rate. Is this a future that will come for all of us or not? Let's see. This is from, by the way, Something Terrible is Happening in South Korea by The Invisible Hand. Great channel. Let's have a look.
On the surface, South Korea is one of the most remarkable countries anyone has ever seen, transforming from being poorer than most African nations to being one of the richest countries in the world in less than 50 years, all while its northern neighbour has remained economically backward. In this story, often told in the media, South Korea can do no wrong. But this doesn't paint the full picture. Beneath the glittering skyscrapers and world-renowned brands, there's a darker side to South Korea's rapid rise, one that's pushing the nation toward a dystopian reality. In 2020, South Korea witnessed 500 deaths from a strange new phenomenon. So strange, in fact, that it developed its own term, gwarosa, or death by overwork. At the heart of this toxic culture are a handful of powerful companies which run the country's economy and its politicians. In fact, just one of these companies, Samsung, accounts for nearly 20% of Korea's entire economy. In a land controlled by the few and not the many, people are switching off. For a country just to keep a stable population, every woman must have 2.1 children. In South Korea, this figure is only 0.7,
It's
3 times less than the replacement rate. And in 2020, for the first time in the country's history, more people died than were born. The South Korean government are not new to coming up with solutions, from promoting actions like this on TV, to suggesting that girls should start school a year earlier to make them more appealing to men. It's just that none of them seem to do anything to address the root cause. By blending the harshest aspects of capitalism.
That's what I always say. No one's ever looking at the root cause. It's always just some bullshit new law or rule to try to make a little change, and it's never enough. Really, it isn't. It's ridiculous.
With traditional Asian hierarchies, South Korea has created a society defined by relentless competition and materialism, leaving many...
Man, I was talking to a friend of mine. This is an important topic. It's this idea that, you must... he's talking about overwork, right? And everyone's trying to do better than the next person so they get enough work so they can survive and so forth, right? And this is something I value very much about European culture, right? Where there's a sense for work-life balance, in a sense that, no, we're not going to work more and we're not going to compete each other and fall over each other just so we can get ahead. We're not going to do it. Because the end goal of those things always leads to the same place. We all get screwed in the end, except for 100 people or whatever small amount it is, right? Like 1%. In the end, if we're all looking to beat everyone else, there can always only be a few winners, no? So it doesn't work. It doesn't work. People say, I hate the argument. I say, you just need to work harder. You just need to study more. You just need to send more applications for people looking for jobs. I'm like, at what point? You're already sending 1,000 applications. Is it not insane? So yeah, but it is what it is. And I'm like, okay, but I get it. This is not, it's not, you can't keep perpetuating it. You're literally adding to it. You're adding to the problem. Sorry. Annoying, right?
Any questioning whether this rapid rise was worth the cost or if it was just inevitable. To understand how modern-day South Korea became so broken, we first need to go back in history. The culture of stress and living under threat is not new, and at the start of the 20th century, Korea was invaded by Japan and occupied under brutal colonial rule for 35 years. But after being liberated in 1945, it was only 5 short years until another conflict emerged, dividing the peninsula in two. Occupation, World War II, and then the Korean War had left deep scars. South Korea was desperately poor and vulnerable to further attacks. Despite support from the United States, it became clear that the only path out of this dire situation was rapid economic growth. An educated, talented workforce, the government reasoned, would be able to rebuild the country and power its exports to the world. Under the leadership of Park Chung-hee, education became the cornerstone of South Korea's redevelopment plan. This intense focus on education tapped into a deep cultural drive for achievement, rooted in Confucian ideals of respect for elders, strict hierarchy, and an unwavering dedication to work. While this philosophy is common across East Asia, South Korea adopted it with a uniquely intense focus on academic success as the ultimate measure of personal worth. It is often said that the path to hell is paved with good intentions, and what began as a plan to rebuild the nation through education and hard work soon spiraled into an obsession, planting the seeds of the country's modern-day crisis. More and more people began attending universities, but before long, an anxious pressure around academic performance had bled into elementary, middle schools, and even kindergartens. In 2020, around 1/4 of all Korean students expressed symptoms of depression. And in the last 6 years alone, the number of 6 to 11-year-olds treated for depression has doubled. As education became the ultimate vehicle for social mobility in South Korea, families were driven to extraordinary lengths to secure an edge for their children. This obsession gave rise to hagwons, private academies where parents pour vast resources to ensure their children's success. Today,
you see what I mean? You're basically taking extra steps to try to get ahead of everyone else. It just never works. I mean, at any point when you get to a 25% depression rate, like you gotta stop something there. That's insanity.
Today, these academies form a $20 billion industry, catering primarily to those who can afford the high fees. All this pressure builds up to the CSAT exams, grueling 8-hour-long tests that can determine a student's university place and entire future. While South Korea has prided itself on being a meritocracy, the sheer importance of these exams has created a system that is anything but. Many of the questions extend far beyond the curriculum taught in public schools, favouring students who have attended these elite hagwons, and for lower-income children, this essentially sets them up for failure before they've even begun. Why all this pressure? The ultimate goal for a Korean 18-year-old is to gain admission to one of South Korea's prestigious Sky universities, Seoul National, Korea, or Yonsei, seen as the key to a successful career and a brighter future. Admission to these universities is typically only granted to students within the top 1% of performers.
Insane.
But in 2010, 46% of high...
I literally said top 1% will be the only winners, and here you go. Here's the proof. How crazy.
Government ranking officials and 50% of CEOs in the major financial industries were graduates of these universities. In many ways, these institutions are the be-all and end-all of Korean society, serving as the final gatekeepers of opportunities. Even outside of these elite institutions, around 70% of Koreans go to university. This is the highest rate in the world, which you may think is a good thing, but it has actually created an interesting phenomenon. Despite so many educated people, Korea also has one of the highest rates of youth inactivity anywhere in the world. Essentially, Koreans are either going to university or they are quietly giving up on life, or in many cases, both. Well over 500,000 young people are simply unwilling to seek employment, and 45% of these people who are inactive have a university degree. This phenomenon of people quietly checking out on life has become known as Korea's Sampo generation. This translates to the 3 sacrifice generation, the generation which must give up relationships, children, and marriage in order to survive in the modern economy. You'd think that after enduring a relentless schedule from kindergarten through a top university, your future would finally open up. This was once the case. In the decades following the Korean War, the ideals of hard work and diligence offered a path to owning a home, supporting a family, and collectively rebuilding the nation. Sacrifice meant not just personal achievement, but also contributing to a shared goal, transforming a war-torn country into an economic success story. However, today, that sense of communal purpose has faded. A survey done in 2019 found that 90% of South Korean women and 82% of young men believe that people born into poverty can never compete with those born into wealth. Education is no longer the vehicle for upward mobility which it once was, and yet people still value it so much. In developed countries, going to university usually rewards you with more pay, typically 40% more, while in the US that could be even higher. But in South Korea, this figure is just 20%. In fact, many students now find that their degrees have actually been a net loss, as they will never make back the cost of tuition. Unfortunately, as so many people have now gone to university, it isn't really that unique anymore. And in order to stand out, more and more education is required.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's an oversupply, right? It's the same in most of the Western world. There's just an oversupply of people going through the same system because that's been taught to them. That's the only way. And then in the end, everyone has it and it's not special anymore. And you just spend all this extra time to gain it, right? And now it doesn't matter, or it doesn't get you that added benefit. It's ridiculous. It's such a broken system. And that's why also some of the trades educations are doing well, you know, where it's like, just become a tradesperson now. You'll do better. Or you'll make even the same pay. You do the less education and you pay less. Are you in university? Did you go through? How's it working for you? I mean,
creating what has been known as an education bubble. In a society obsessed with hard work, diligence meant eventually securing a home and raising a family. But now it barely covers the rent. That is, if you're lucky. However, in South Korea's capital, Seoul, this effect is extreme.
yeah,
Over
sure.
half of South Korea live in the capital, and this is also home to the infamous Sky Universities, the pinnacle of society. Since everyone who wants to do well tries to go to one of these universities, and most people who employ those graduates are also set up in the same town, the gradual build-up of people and some really restrictive regulations which prevent large-scale property development has made the housing market a bidding war, which is usually won by the elite in society. An
Sure.
unintended consequence of concentrating economic opportunities in a few expensive urban centres like Seoul is leading to the biggest problem facing Korea. Nobody is having kids anymore. In rural areas, children are often seen as contributors to family labour, but by contrast, in cities, the cost of raising a children skyrockets, while work-life balance has become nearly non-existent. But this is only one from a whole list of reasons as to why many South Koreans are simply not having children. Aside from the brutal work culture, the traditional patriarchal model of the early married, stay-at-home mother has deep roots in South Korean history and Confucian gender norms. But instead of clinging to this vision of bygone social relations, which are now nearly impossible to fulfill in Korea's modern economy, promoting a new one may help. Childbirth outside of marriage is still heavily frowned upon in South Korean society, yet the bar to marriage remains very high. This is because it is often associated with wealth, notably for buying a house. This creates a catch-22, whereby people envisage marriage only if they can afford a house. But affording a house is more challenging for unmarried people than married people. Many Koreans are now uninterested in marriage, but still want to have children, yet suffering the condemnation of having a child out of wedlock likely discourages them. In 2022, only 2% of births in South Korea occurred outside of marriage. The OECD average is around 40%, and rises to rates like 60% in some countries like France. Giving legal recognition to non-married families would also help, and reducing social stigma around this area is one of the many levers the South Korean government can pull to fix the crisis, but one which they seem reluctant to do. What is adding to this problem and making people less optimistic about life is South Korea's job market.
The thing about allowing people to have, or not allowing, but making less stigma to having kids out of wedlock is also not a good solution. It's not a long-term one, you know? It's one of those things where you would like to have couples remain together. Well, you have a stronger family, the kids have someone to look up to. There's not all this divorcee stuff. So it's again, you need to go to the root of the problem, right? And South Korea seems to be trapped in this sense of attainment of perfection. No human can do that reliably, especially when the incentive decreases over time. So they're looking for attainment of perfection, which is impossible, or as perfect as can be, which is also the reward for something like that needs to be really high. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. That's the problem. The only people who come too close to perfection are the people like high athlete, sports athletes, some of the best singers who make it through, rappers, things like that. Whatever. It can be any industry. I'm just going media, like total random stuff. But then they do it, and you get to that place because the reward allows for further growth in it. But if you then look for almost full perfection in a university and you come out, you can't afford to have a home, the job market might be difficult, I don't know, and things like this, you're just like, whoever is after you is going to wonder whether it even makes sense to do the same thing. It's not. And South Korea might be an extreme example, but this is happening in a lot of the West. Probably in a lot of other countries too, I wouldn't know. But that's the issue right now. The building a country based on maximum output without any consideration for human life always fails. Because the incentive requires the person, will make the person give up. Whether it's depression, suicide, or just literally just quitting. Like just mentally, like not even able to do it. I'm sure a lot of you watching might even feel like that. It's like, what the hell's the point, you know?
More specifically, the sheer domination of the entire economy by a literal handful of corporations. During South Korea's rapid industrialization, a few companies in particular came to dominate Korea's export success and in turn their economy. These are of course Korea's infamous chaebols. Companies like Samsung, Hyundai and LG, which placed members of the founding family in ownership of management positions. The top 5 taken together represent nearly 2/3 of the entire Korean stock market's value. But despite such dominance, employment in these companies only works out to around 12% of jobs in the market.
That's insane.
The amount of money controlled by these companies has meant that employment in chaebols has become synonymous with stability, prestige, and financial security. These family-owned corporate giants offer salaries and benefits that outshine most alternatives, granting them an almost magnetic pull on job seekers. In fact, Samsung alone is estimated to account for around 20% of South Korea's GDP, owning subsidiaries across almost all aspects of Korean life. This kind of corporate dominance is not normal. In the United States, the largest company, Walmart, accounts for around 2% of GDP. But aside from being absolutely terrible for smaller businesses, this dominant structure has bred a further wave of rigid hierarchy and toxic corporate culture. Korea's terrible work environment is well renowned for being one of the worst in the world, and has consistently been the worst place to work as a woman in the OECD for the last 12 years. Unfortunately, these strict hierarchies don't just lead to a stressful environment, but often have far-reaching consequences, not just for junior employees or newcomers, but for the entire society. This was made famous in Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers, which follows the case of the 1997 Korean air crash in Guam. In this case, hierarchical structure prevented a junior pilot from reporting a critical error to his superior, contributing to the deaths of over 200 passengers and crew. But unfortunately, as Korea's economy developed, this hierarchy extended itself across society, where these chaebols were placed at the top of Korean society and devoid of any real accountability.
Oh my god,
particularly
look at this one. He totally didn't care. It's funny. The whole thing about hierarchy is something I didn't grow up with. It doesn't matter which employer I have or whatever. I treat them like they're next to me. It's just something I grew up with. I don't know. In Denmark, you don't have that sense of major hierarchy there. And also, I wasn't taught it either by my parents, or by my mother at least. And so I just don't understand this. I would never be able to work the culture in South Korea. I just wouldn't. I'd be talking back to my boss all the time. I'd be terrible.
When it came to their relationship with the government, historically, the chaebols have been seen as...
I'd be fired, but I wouldn't even care either. That's the best thing. Well, maybe I would. It'd be a different life. But in this case, right the way I am now, I wouldn't give a shit.
Pillars of the nation's post-war economic success. And for decades, South Korean leaders have equated their achievements with national prosperity, essentially creating a relationship in which any criticism of these companies was akin to being unpatriotic. Politicians often rely on them for campaign financing and promote their successes as national triumphs, while chaebols lobby for favourable legislation and public policies. This cosy relationship, however, has become increasingly problematic for the country, not just in the waves of the scandals, from the Sewol ferry disaster, where over 300 lives were lost due to illegal modifications and lax safety oversight, to Samsung's bribery scandal, which saw millions exchanged for political favours and led to the impeachment of a president, but for actually slowly crippling Korea's economy. Structural rigidities in its labour and product markets have hampered productivity and innovation. Excessive regulations, entry barriers for startups, and the dominance of conglomerates shield large firms from competition while stifling entrepreneurship. At the same time, rigid labour laws, such as the seniority-based pay and strong protections for regular workers, make it difficult for companies to adapt to technological changes and new opportunities. Ultimately, South Korea's struggles with low productivity and inequality stem from a combination of hierarchical cultural norms, systemic corruption, and structural inefficiencies. Addressing these issues requires not only breaking the entrenched ties between government and chaebols, but also fostering a more flexible, competitive, and innovative economic environment. The result of all this is not just an economy which is slowing, but something far more serious.
Man, I want to go visit South Korea at some point.
A society
Before there's no one left, you know?
which is more suicidal, depressed, and ready to give up on life than any time in the country's history, and one which unsurprisingly people do not want to have children in. The response in Korea to their own demographic time bomb has been somewhat surprising, with some reasoning that the main issue may not be the rigid hierarchy or corporate-fueled expensive living, but in fact feminism. While movements like 4B, which promote no relationships with men, certainly aren't making any more children, South Korea's demographic crisis far predates the rise of feminism as a widespread outlook and the 2017 Me Too movement. In fact, it was more than 40 years ago, in 1983, when South Korea's fertility rate first fell below 2.1, dropping to 1.5 in 1998, before reaching the worrying lows of 0.72 today.
That's insane.
In December 2024, South Korea made headlines when their president tried to set up military law over the country. This once again shone a spotlight on a country that is often overlooked by its more controversial northern neighbour. But in many ways, it is a country with even more profound challenges. These challenges are not just the byproducts of rapid industrialization, they are woven into the very fabric of South Korea's success. The same structures that once fueled growth and prosperity now leave many disillusioned, burnt out, and unable to envision a brighter future. The question is not whether South Korea can change, but whether it's ready to confront the structures and ideals that brought it here in the first place.
Man, thank you for the video. Let's read comments as always, because this is a damn sad situation. It's crazy. You can go a whole day in Seoul and not see a single child. I wouldn't know, but that is crazy. How can two countries next to each other adopt the worst parts of capitalism and communism? Korea just feels like it's just set for failure, huh? Or what? I don't know. I mean, I say that lightheartedly, of course. Two dystopias on one peninsula. Nice feat. That's true. One, around $2 to $3 million home in Seoul to even be eligible for marriage. Damn. No protected maternal-paternal leave. Insane. Long hours of work commute. Exactly. You don't even have time for anything. 4, super competitive education and expensive after-school programs for kids, so you can't even pay for stuff. But you got to work 24 hours a day at this point. 5, all the popular TV shows and media is about cons of marriages. Yeah, that's another massive one, right? When the media is just not favoring it. I'm not South Korean, but I've seen how that country's education and workplace system crushes children, teenagers, and adults. If I was unfortunate enough to be a South Korean, there's no way I'd drag some poor innocent kid into such a nightmare. Yeah, I think a lot of people are feeling like this, and South Korea is just the extreme example of it. But a lot of people have this particular mindset, this one, where they don't feel like there's much hope in whatever country they're in the West at least, and probably some Southeast Asian countries as well. And so they wonder, why would I have a kid here? And because no one looks like they're anyways trying to solve anything about it in terms of government. So what's the point, right? We'll just wait it out. I don't know. North Korea, 1984. South Korea dystopia, 2077. Yeah. Have you seen the English test for university entrance exams? It's full of complicated wordings, and all the questions are gotcha questions designed to test the student's focus and concentration. Nothing at all to do with the testing, whether the student knows English or not. Even native speakers have trouble with it, let alone a young student whom English is a foreign language. I didn't know that. That's crazy. My face after realizing I was lucky not to be born in South Korea. Well, it's sad, man. It's sad for whoever's in South Korea. This is not. I mean, it's easy to make jokes about, and we all have the freedom to do so, but if you have a country that has like a 25% depression rate, was it the country or anyone's in school? I don't remember, but and there's just no hope for the future. They don't want to have kids anymore. Talk about a complete failure. There's no other way to put it. That's a complete failure. And in some sense, it goes for any country. If any country has a problem with people not wanting to have kids, it's failing. Again, South Korea just being an extreme example of it. People have forgotten all the fear-mongering that used to be done, saying population growth without its control. Yeah, that's true. That was a dumb time. Now, since the oligarchs want cheap labor, don't you think it's interesting that suddenly industrialized nations are portrayed as centers of population decline, while the oligarchs support immigration of cheap laborers from poor countries, which somehow mysteriously are overpopulated? Yes, exactly. This is a case in the US as well. And some of the people who come from these countries that are so-called overpopulated, like, for example, India, are like, though some of them are the same people who are going to fight hard to get ahead, and they don't understand. Some of them don't understand. I'm not speaking particularly about India, but some of them don't understand what it means to have to fight for a standard of living, and will do anything to get ahead and to make more money while dropping personal integrity, ethics, and morality. It's not a good thing. No children, no future, no hope. Korea is just like me, for real. Oh, I feel sorry for you. Sorry, man. Yeah, funny though. It is a problem in East Asia. People are sick of their government toxic work culture. Yeah. In the news of YouTube, no country is beautiful and good. They all seem to be collapsing. That's true. YouTube does feel like that right now. I mean, you can see it right here. Poor, poor. Just these are even two different channels, and they just use the same exact word, placed it over the country. How is it? Who copied from who? Let's be honest at this point. I don't know. South Korea is the perfect example of why anti-monopolization laws are so important and why oligarchs need to be stopped. The thing about these companies like Samsung, for example, when you have such a large entity, you're not speaking to the good of a single human being. You're speaking to an entity which sees and looks at life in statistics, profit and loss, and those types of things. And so you cannot really argue with it. Okay, there's a slim chance you could make changes, but mostly there's so many levels you have to go through to even try to make some form of change. And if it breaks the profit margin, it's unlikely anything will be done about it. It's very difficult. So that's a problem with a form of immorality or corruption in itself within a company. Any system that benefits those in power at the expense of those who aren't won't change without either complete economic collapse or a blood tax paid by both of us. Not only Korea. Last year, 1.5 million people died in Japan, but only 700,000 births. Yeah, Japan is the other extreme example, really. Hell, adult diapers outsells baby diapers in Japan, which is insane, man. All right, Korean here. Let's hear the last one. Korea has to broaden its definition of a success, going beyond the academic elitism it usually reverses. Look, so this is a Korean, right? He has better English than all of us, based on that test he took, which tried to trick him at every turn. Foster entrepreneurial spirit and reducing the education obsession/inflation. The ultimate objective is to make life more hopeful, as there would be more flexibilities with more roads to a fulfilling and happy life. The combo of Sky University plus corporate life, or chaebol life if you are well connected, should be a route, but just one of many, because otherwise you have people fighting to enter a diminutive entrance. Exactly. It's stressing and soul crushing. Yeah. Dehumanizing. Ultimately, with more hope and confidence about the future, people would have more kids naturally. slowly but for the right reasons, not some government silly TV ad. Man, look how smart the Koreans are. But for some reason, they can't get out of this trouble. And they're not alone, unfortunately. What do you think? Are you Korean? What do you think's going on? What do we have to do here? I mean, if you're literally from any Western country, what's happening? What do we do? We're all facing some of the same problems, no? What do we do, man? Can't just have kids? Can we?